Hey there, Big Finish. Here we go. Chapter 78, The Farewell. One robot had an army of animals at her command, and she asked them to bring every robot part and rifle back to the airship. Absolutely everything had to go. It was the only way to make sure the Ricos would never come back. The island animals had no trouble locating the remains of the dead robots. Retrieving those remains took a bit more effort, but they were up to the challenge. Teams of clever creatures returned with robot parts from different shapes and sizes. Smashed heads and broken rifles and twisted tubes and heavy bodies were all loaded into the ship until the entire island had been cleared. Even the tiniest scraps were collected. It's amazing what an army of animals can do. A light mist was falling when they finally heaved Roz through the ship's doorway. Her head slowly turned around to face the crowd of geese and beavers and owls and insects and foxes and raccoons and vultures and moose and bears and possums and fish and deer and otters and turtles and woodpeckers and squirrels and frogs and hares and on and on. Every animal on the island had come to give the robot a proper send-off. "Goodbye, you wild animals," Roz's voice echoed throughout the gray mist. The wild animals smiled, and a few of them started to roar, and then started to screech, and then started howling and chirping and grunting. Soon every creature was hollering goodbye to Roz. The chorus of wild voices grew louder and louder, shaking the robot's body, rattling the ship, booming across the island and up into the clouds. And then their voices gradually died down to silence. Brightbill fluttered up to his mother's shoulder. "You understand why I must leave," said the robot. "I understand," sniffled the goose. "More Ricos could be heading here right now. I just do not know. There is so much I do not know. I think this is time I will get some answers." "Will I ever see you again?" said Brightbill, wiping his eyes. "You are my son, and this is my home," said Roz. "I will do everything in my power to return." Brightbill hugged his mother's worn face. "I love you, Mama." "I love you, son." The goose fluttered back to his flock, and the robot took one last look at her home, and the door hummed closed. Remember, she doesn't have any arms and legs. Chapter 79, The Departure. The airship's engines automatically fired up. Then the ship slowly floated above the island, turned to the south, and disappeared into the clouds. Chapter 80, The Sky. Our story ends in the sky, where the robot was being whisked away from the only home she had ever known. As Roz sat in the airship, the broken and alone, and speeding toward a mysterious future, she looked back at her miraculous past. Reader, it must seem impossible that our robot could have changed so much. Maybe the Ricos were right. Maybe Roz was defective, and some glitch in her programming had caused her to accidentally become a wild robot. Or maybe Roz was designed to think and learn and change, and she had simply done the things better than anyone could have imagined. However it happened, Roz felt lucky to have lived such an amazing life, and every moment had been recovered in her computer brain. Even the earliest memories were perfectly clear. She could still see the sun shining through the gash in her crate. She could still hear the waves crashing against the shore. She could still smell the salt water in the pine trees. Would she ever see or hear or smell those things again? Would she ever again climb the mountain, or build a lodge, or play with a goose? Not just any goose, a son. Brightbill had been Roz's son from the moment she picked up his egg. She had saved him from his certain death, and then he saved her. He was the reason Roz had lived for so long, and if she wanted to continue living, if she wanted to be wild again, she needed to be with her family and her friends on her island. So as Roz raced through the sky, she began computing a plan. She would get the repairs she needed. She would escape from her new life, and she would find her way home. And that's it. There's a note from the author. And it says, I've always been fascinated by robots, but the real robots that exist today, by the robots that exist in the future, and by the fantastic robot characters that exist only in films and books. It's funny how many philosophical questions spring up when you think about artificial beings. Do we want those robots that can think and feel like a person? Would we trust robots if to perform a surgery, care for children, police our cities? In a world where robots did all the work, how would humans spend our time? I've been fascinated by the natural world. I grew up exploring the fields and streams and forests near my home, and I learned a lot about the local wildlife. I knew that deer were almost always active at dusk and dawn. I watched squirrels methodically collecting and storing acorns, and I heard geese honking overhead, and they flew south every autumn. Animals have always had such predictable behavior that follow such rigid routines that at times they almost seem robotic. And sometimes along the line it occurred to me that animal instincts are kind of like computer programs. Thanks to their instincts, animals automatically run from danger, build nests, and stay close to their families, and they often do these things without thinking, as if they've been programmed to perform specific actions in specific times. Surprisingly, wild animals and robots actually have those things in common. These kinds of thoughts have filled my imagination most of my life, and then years ago I started scribbling down words about a robot and some wild animals, and I couldn't stop doodling pictures of a robot in a tree, and I started asking myself odd questions. Would it be an intelligent robot? What would an intelligent robot do if she were stranded in a wilderness? How might she adapt to the environment? How might the environment adapt to her? Well, I was referring to this robot with the words like she and her, and for some manner, why have so many scientific fiction writers given genders to so many of their robot characters? An image of a robot named Roz was slowly forming in my mind, and I could see her exploring the remote island. I could hear her communicating with the wild animal, and I could feel her becoming part of the wilderness. After years of imagining and drawing, I realized I had all the ingredients for a robot nature story. So I drove out to the cabin in the woods, opened a fresh notebook, and began writing The Wild Robot. And that is by Peter Brown. And Peter Brown also has he wrote a lot of picture books, but he also wrote a sequel to The Wild Robot, The Wild Robot Returns. So if you like this book, check that one out. Bye.